Hello everybody, hope you are doing fine. Welcome in this second lesson. Today we're going to see how the Blender 3D interface is laid out, where to find tools, and what is the naming of all the different parts. We're not gonna design anything today, we're gonna just have a look at all the tools and the possibilities, very high level again, and it takes some time to get used to this interface, so we'll go as slow as possible and as clear as possible. If you have questions, please stop me any moment so I don't go on explaining more complicated stuff. Okay, so any question, please write a message in the chat. I will get it a few seconds later and we'll get it from there. So once you start Blender, you are presented with a splash screen. I didn't ask, guys, can you hear me properly? Still the audio fine? Anyone there? Can you tell me if you can hear me properly? Okay, sorry for the interruption. So, when you start Blender, you are presented with this splash screen. Depending on the version, you have a different illustration, as many software, as probably any software. You will check the version that is the latest one. It's worth updating with every single version, with every single official version. The developers are very active and they release a version every month, sometimes even 2 a month. That's an average. Each version may introduce some differences in the interface, but generally speaking, from the 2.8 they are trying to keep the same kind of layout. Before that, the layout was completely different. All the user interface was different, the controls were different. So now from the 2.8 on, they are keeping the same layout. It's a free software, so the community is very active. The support is based on community. You can get support really a bit everywhere. There are like the official forums. There are a lot of channels of support channels a bit everywhere. On Reddit there is a big channel of support. You can find me there too. Anyway, so we have new file. We start with a new file. Of course, you have manual, and you have a lot of classic link. You can donate to the developers too, and actually there are big donors, companies that work in CGI that are financing in a way the non-profit organization that basically put together all the developers. Hello Techno again, welcome back. Today we're looking at Blender 3D from a very basic point of view, so the user interface, what you can do, and not much else, but it's gonna take a while. As I was saying, in the splash screen you can see a number of templates that are layout of the user interface. So each single part of Blender is completely modular, can be moved around, can be customized depending on what you are going to do. That means that doesn't matter which user interface layout you pick, all the functions are gonna be there and everything can be done in the same way with the same tools. They are just in a different place. So for example, if we click General, which is the standard one, you are presented with this interface. While if I click on 2D animation, I have a different interface But again, all the elements are just shown or hidden based on that preferences. So this that looks like a white paper, actually if I tilt it, it's the 3D space. So as I said, it's just a visualization of the 3D space. If you want to do video editing, of course you have a more common layout with one screen here. You can have two if you want, and then you have a number of layers. We're not going to do any video editing on Blender. It's just to explain to you that the interface is completely modular. We'll start with the general user interface, because it's the one you are gonna be using the most. So we'll start from this. You're gonna see a grid, which is a 3D space grid. We have axes, which are actually color coded. The red one, it's X, you can see here. Then you have Y, Y, in English it's Y, yeah, I forgot that. And then you have Z, which is the vertical in this case, and it's not visualized. You can visualize that if you want. If you don't want, you don't need it. As long as you see the perspective of this plane, I think having also the vertical one, it's a bit too much. What you can do in this screen. Before I think I should explain to you what's in all these bits around. You have a normal menu, which is mainly for file and Windows organization, so all the parts of Blender. Then you have here layout again, so I can switch from a layout to another, and they are still the same software. As you can see, the interface slightly moves around, but all the elements are still the same. This is up to you. You can use one layout and go and modify that. You can add your own layout, because the interface is very flexible, and you will find yourself often moving windows around. They will stretch. So for example, if you go on the border of each window, you see this darker border, you can go with the arrow, and then once you have the double arrow, you can expand. Now this is a normal behavior in many software, but I think Blender made something even deeper. So not only you can stretch anything exactly as you need, and if you have multiple screen, you can detach a part and move it on another screen altogether, but you can also split the section. So we have one main section here, one underneath, then we have this right side that is split in two more parts. Now, how do I know that these are two or this is one? Well, first of all, I can move this, that means there are two different ones, and then I can check the header. So each section has an icon here with a chevron, I think that's the name, chevron pointing down, and if you click on the chevron, you will be offered with a number of things that you want in that specific section of the interface. You're not going to modify your interface every day, but it's important if you miss a part or if a part disappeared that you know how to get it back. So, main window, okay, this is where you work most of the time. There's this icon, and it's called 3D viewport. Okay, it's the viewport. You can use it for 3D or 2D, but it's a viewport. It's called 3D viewport. This one here, it's called outliner. Okay, and this is basically I would say a list of elements in your project. They may be objects, images, lights, cameras, groups. All the stuff can be found in what is called outliner. Here below you will find the properties that are related to the selected object. So quickly, if I select an object, all these properties here that are that are categorized in different tabs are referring to this selection. Okay, so if I unselect, I still have those, but if I select something else, I have completely different properties. You can also see that now this is a new feature actually of the new version. Now when you select something, it's selected in the outliner too, which is very handy, especially when you have thousands of objects here, and sometimes you have thousands of objects there. It's very hard to find them, so this is quite easy. This one is called properties. This one below, it's a timeline. But then you may want more things. Or what if I want actually, I want two screens here. So you go in the corners, see where there's more space in between the windows, and when the cursor becomes a cross, you can actually click and drag, and you are creating another piece of interface. Now what I want here, well, I can choose to have another viewport, or I can pick up anything really, like let's say that I want the preferences of the software always open, they're there. Or I can, for example, instead of the preferences, I can have the file browser, so your file system will show your object, picture, model, texture, background, anything will be shown and always handy. If you go here and just move it because you don't want it anymore, you cannot really remove it. So you are not going to remove it by mistake. You have to go in between the two windows until you have the double head cursor, right click and join areas. Once you join areas, you can decide which one I would like to take over. So if I go with the left arrow, I will basically expand the right window, and it's gone. So what's happened is that you can have one here, and then you can create one more here, and then you have another one here, and then you have a bunch of this window. Oops, and then you have, sorry, no. See, now it's gone. What I'm gonna do, I can create a new one. Or what if I split this one in two, and then you start having a bunch of areas that are like a mess. In the worst case, you can load the factory settings, but that means that your file will be gone. So if you're working on something, the layout is saved with your file, so the factory settings will only change the layout of the default scene to start with. So if you go in modeling and go back to layout, you are still with this layout because you modified this layout. Okay, so what you want to do is actually know how to revert a situation like this, which may happen and will happen possibly. Join areas, and now here I don't need two, I need just one, doesn't matter which. I need my properties here, and then probably this smaller, then it's again like the default situation. It may be overwhelming sometimes, no panic. It's a complex interface, I understand, but it's very flexible, and once you know how to move around, it's gonna be amazing. Also, you want to notice that you have in some of the window left and right small arrows here that can be expanded. And they will show, depending on the content, more settings. I don't know why I cannot expand this one right now. here I don't have the left one, here there's nothing. So depending on the window, you may have a left or left and right menu with more settings. I don't know why I had here the right one, but there's supposed to be, when you have some elements here, you can see the settings. Right now it's not showing anything because that nothing selected. Okay, but we are gonna go to the timeline editing later. Okay, so and you have other tabs in it, so you have more settings. Also, some of the settings are in multiple locations because depending on what you're doing, or for example, let's say that you don't have this on and you are editing this object, you have this same settings here, because maybe here you are in another page, so you can access this from here instead of going here and clicking there. Just remove it from a second, just showing how many different places are in this interface at the moment. So these are the layout, as we said. Let's see the main element in this space. Here are the selection you can do. The most common selection is of course the usual rectangle or click with left mouse button, while right mouse button will open a context menu with options that we don't need right now. Middle mouse button will instead be used to rotate the scene. As I said yesterday, you are not gonna rotate the scene for a while. For the first lesson, we're gonna focus on 2D movement, but what's happening if you're doing 2D, you are in this kind of view, and then you press middle mouse button, you will see the third dimension. So how to go back to 2D or how to enable 2D? Well, in Blender you can pick up a user perspective, which is a user is not a camera. So you can have a camera pointed at the object and see through the camera, but you can also have a user, which is basically what I'm showing you now, that will see everything, but it's a perspective view. So if I click on view, I can have an orthographic view which removes the perspective. Okay, now there's no perspective, all the dimension will be always the same no matter what's the position is in the scene, but still that's not what I need for 2D. For 2D, what we need is going into a view. Imagine this as cameras that are all orthographic, so with no perspective deformation, and they are based in a parallel point compared to the grid. So it's exactly what you imagine. If I click on X, first of all I can click in the sphere, and it's like having middle mouse button. If you don't have a middle mouse button but want to rotate, that's how you do it. You click in this area. But for us, we are gonna click on X or Y, it's up to you, and we have our object in a 2D grid. You still will see this object. You probably don't need it in the beginning, so what you can do is select them one by one and then hit delete on your keyboard, or right click, delete, or X, delete. The difference is that with X will ask confirmation, X will ask confirmation, while with delete on the keyboard will just disappear. Did I just remove it? Yes, at the moment I'm deleting objects that we are not gonna use. We are not gonna focus on the cameras today or lights, but only on the interface. So I'm showing you how to do very basic things like removing an object that you don't use it. So just delete it from the scene. You can also see here on the right that it's nowhere anymore. You can add it back, of course, if you want. You can create another one. So as we are in this view, if you click again middle mouse button, it will go back into a perspective view. So you can see here how it changed from right orthographic. Here you have front or back. You can keep rotating front, right, back, left. You're rotating basically the view. When you are doing 2D graphics, you only are in one view, so you don't rotate around unless you want to achieve some kind of perspectives. Then you can work on a plan and then rotate slightly the whole thing to give some depth. That's an option. And of course you can go in the visualization from the top or the bottom if you prefer working on the Z. So you have X and Y. Probably we should go that way. It's gonna be easier to understand what's going on for some of the design. And we have our cube. Now a cube is of course a square. If you look it from an orthographic view, it's going to be a square, but we don't need the third dimension of a cube to do 3D. So I will show later why a cube is not the best start if you want to do 2D. Going back to the user interface, actually I can go, yeah, let's stay here. So here is to rotate the view, as I show you. Then you have a zoom. You can zoom in different ways. If you press Ctrl on the keyboard and then move, you are actually moving the point of view. So it's not a real zoom. While if you are doing this with the scroll wheel, if you are in a camera view, you are doing the zoom. So you will go from wide angle to a tele kind of views. But we will see the camera in a different moment. So at the moment we'll just focus on moving around. So Control, middle mouse button, up and down will zoom. Will zoom the image, but as this is not a real camera, it's just moving. So if you want to drag the point of view around, you press Shift, middle mouse button, and move around. So always the middle mouse button. Without anything will rotate. With Control we'll go closer and farther, and with Shift we'll move it around. Which also led to another point. You are not really moving the object, but you are moving the screen. It's like when you move the canvas in Photoshop. It's your background. You're just moving the image scene. So you can see here the axis. The position of the object is always the same. You're just moving around the point of view. Of course, here you have again all the controls here, so you can change from orthographic to perspective. You can see through the camera that right now we don't have, so it doesn't do anything. You can move the point of view here. The suggestion, it's always use as much as you can shortcuts. don't rely on buttons on the user interface. I'm gonna use them now because you have to see where are they, but actually you want to learn how to do things. So for example, if I go here, it says move. If I wait a moment, it will tell me what does this command do, but also how can I enable it. So in my case, I use G. If I click the object and I press G on the keyboard, see the icon change, and now if I move the mouse, I move the object around. Okay, this is not the only way to do it, but of course you can click here. If you click on the icon, will appear something else, which is a tool that let me do different operations, like moving the object in one axis, or for example, if I rotate, I can move it in 2 axes only. So again, it's not important right now, but it's important you know that all the different commands have a shortcut, and if you want to be fast, you need to learn the shortcut as much as you can. It's worth mentioning that depending on the area or the part of the interface you are, the same shortcut can do different things, because the shortcut list is very big, and the number of shortcuts you can have in a keyboard are limited. So there's a way to learn all the shortcuts, and my favorite way is when you know that you're using a command very often, just learn the shortcut, because it's gonna make your your process much faster. If you're curious about all the shortcut available, you go to Edit, Preferences, Key Map, and then you will notice that window, which is window. If you expand window, you will see all the shortcuts for the window. Then we have what about screen, global, and we have all of this. So there are, this is the 3D view in specifically, and you have all of this shortcut. This is not the way to learn them, it's mainly a way to modify them. I believe I never modified any shortcut, because it's better to get used to the shortcuts that are in the software. Once the software is updated, you don't need to reset all your personal shortcut. Plus, the way it's done, it's basically the shortcuts are suggested by professional, and they are in the place they should be. It's a very mature software, and I would suggest to not change the shortcut, just learn the one you have by default. Going back, so we have seen how to move in the window around, and that works exactly the same way if I go to in a 2D views or in an orthographic views. So Shift, middle mouse will move around, Control, middle mouse will zoom in, and this is an orthographic view. That means that when I zoom in, the perspective is not going to change. Even in a 3D orthographic view, it's like a isometric kind of graphic. If I zoom in, you're not going to see less or more deformation. It's going to always be just a scaled up or down version of the same object, which is called isometric style. And that's how that's a way to do isometric graphics. It's actually using an orthographic view at 45 degrees, angled 45 degrees, but that's a different story. We may explore that later on. And you see how it changes. You know that this is a cube, but actually if you measure this side, it's going to be smaller than this from this point of view. If I rotate, it's going to be the opposite. That's how perspective works. While with this, these sides are exactly the same, and this is more evident when you have different objects. Let's create a different object. Add mesh, it's to create your objects that are called meshes. At least one kind of object is called mesh. And there are different kind of objects, of course. And let's go with the cylinder. Now, if I go close to cylinder enough, close enough, you will probably notice that this side is much bigger than this one. Okay, I can do it even more. This side it's much bigger than this one, while in an orthographic view they are exactly the same. Yes, it looks weird, but this is geometrically correct. Let's go back to our friend, the cube, and go on with the user interface. So we've seen the grid. We see this thing here, which is called a 3D cursor, and we probably don't need it. For most of the time you won't need it. So one thing you can do is go to overlays here. Okay, first of all, you can remove anything of the user interface, and we'll just keep the object, the design you have. But you may want to work with the grid to have an idea of where objects are, especially when you are in 3D. You need to understand where an object is. So if I go here and I remove all the objects, it's not a big deal, but I would keep the grid always on, while the 3D cursor can be easily removed. So one way to remove the element from these overlays that are additional helps, I would say, in the user interface, it's expanding this area, and then you can remove the 3D cursor. You have also this point, which is the center of mass of the object. It can be moved in any point, but usually when you create a new object, this center is the origin of the object. It's always in the dead center of the object. Do we need it? Yes, again, it's like the 3D cursor. You may need it or not. You can remove it if you don't want it. It's important you know that you can visualize this. From here you can also, as I said, activate the other axis, which is really redundant in 3D, and in 2D doesn't make any sense at all because you're not going to see that. So by default it's disabled. There are other things you can enable or not. Let's not go there yet. What else? Here we have collections, which are groups. They are called collections because you can have I really don't know why they're called collection and not groups, because they do exactly the same thing. Sorry guys, this is a doubt I have. I probably can ask someone, or someone can tell me maybe, or I can leave a comment. So you have collection that can be expanded, and then you have here, you have something that it's like the visibility of the object. Can be set by group or can be set by single object in the scene. I keep going back and forward with the interface because I want you to keep the focus on the fact that it doesn't matter if it's in 2D or 3D. It's exactly the same thing for the software. They are the behavior is exactly the same for everything I do. The only difference is the point of view. In one case it's orthographic from one axis, in the other case it's perspective. Okay, so whatever we do, the 3D will always be there. Here below, well, here we have the timeline. It's a classic timeline right now, most of the time, especially when you're designing, you don't even need a timeline. You can enable a timeline only when you start the animation. You can decide to just keep it there so you can open it and close easily instead of creating your own timeline, because you can have another timeline, then you have two timelines. So you can decide to keep it, but just minimize basically. So the timeline has a record button that it's auto keying. That means that whatever you do here, depending on what frame you are, will be saved as a keyframe. You guys know what is a keyframe. Probably you know other software and they use the same kind of terms, so I'm not going to explain what is a keyframe. But what I'm going to show you is how to move here. You just left click on the cursor and you move around. It looks different, but it's the same concept. If you want to save a position of an object, you have to insert a keyframe, and if you enable auto key, as you move here and you do some action on the object, will be saved automatically. Don't forget to disable, because if you select multiple objects and you forget that you had the auto key, you will start creating a lot of keyframes that will start moving around. So it's important to keep an eye on this. This is an important, it's a very important thing. It's no wonder it's dead center in the user interface. You know this command, I don't have to explain much. Right now, by default, the animation has 250 frames. I'll show you how you can modify the two, starting frame 1. Here you have this weird scrolling bars, and there's a small dot at the end. If you click on the scrolling bar dot and expand, you are basically zooming the scrolling bar. Okay, that's how you move in this area. I'm gonna show you later, when you have multiple objects, how to select the frame you need and what other area you can use to edit the animation behavior and working with curves and more complex stuff. Right now it's just the bare minimum you need to know to move around. Let's expand this because I still haven't activated my window, so I have to make space for what I'm gonna show you now. On the side of the properties, we have a number of small tabs. These tabs will open more settings for our selected object. In reality, the first few of these tabs, I would say that too, this is basically the same options you find here, some of them. Then you have other workspace options that we are not gonna take care of. Then you have these white icons that are basically going to define how your scene is gonna be rendered. So everything you see here on screen is not the final result. We can enable the preview that it's very close to the final result, but anything you do must be rendered in order to be used, exported, or having even an image must be rendered. So all you do is part of the project, all you see is part of the project. After you render, you have the final project, which is different from editing something in a video editing software or in Photoshop, where everything you do it's instant. Here we have a layer of rendering that needs to be done once you finish with your designing. All these icons are defining all the settings that you can use. So I'm going to go very quickly on what does it mean. The first one are the render properties, and there's a lot to understand. I'm not gonna go deep there. The only thing you have to remember is that you can use different render engines, that it's like a different bit of software that you can use to realize your scene, to render your scene, so to create the final version of your scene. The reason why there are different engines, it's because different engines give different results, and they are also different in the performances. So some work much better with the graphic card, so using the GPU. Some other works better with the CPU. Some others can be using the two things. So which one should I use? Well, the latest engine introduced is called Eevee, and it's an engine that it's a real-time engine. So it's something that can be previewed on your screen while you work. It's very close to the concept of a game engine where everything works on screen. In fact, the naming of things, it's very similar to Unity, which is a game engine. The naming of tools and the naming of technique you can use, it's similar to game engines. It's real time. I would say almost real time, but let's say that the feedback it's almost real time, depending on what kind of graphic card you got. Cycles, it's a very much more photorealistic engine that if you're doing just illustration or very simple design, you don't really need. It takes much longer to render with cycles, and for motion graphics you may use it sometimes, but if you really optimize your workflow for Eevee, you can achieve a very similar result to cycles, spending sometimes a very tiny fraction of the time that you need for the render with cycles instead. So Eevee, it's much faster. The results need a bit more tweaking, and it's a bit more complicated, the process to produce a good result, but it's a result that is going to be much faster to achieve. Workbench, it's just what we're looking at now. So if you want to render what you see on the screen, you select Workbench, but we are not going to use this style. Okay, so forget the Workbench style. It's not going to happen anytime soon that you need that. Probably it will be removed in the next few versions, so forget about it. Here are all the settings for the render. So we are just selecting the engine for now, and we move to the next tab to see what's in each tab, and then we go back to each setting of each tab. Output, here's the resolution. It's not what we see here on screen, but it's the resolution of the final image or the final video you're going to create. The aspect ratio is kind of simple to understand, but it's going to be 1 and 1 because you're not going to change the aspect ratio. Here you find the length of the animation. It's based in frame, depending on where you are in the world. Don't forget to set the right frame rate. So I usually use 25, sometimes 30. I will never go up, because don't forget that each single frame needs to be rendered. So when you have 3D created images, if you do a 60 frame per second, it means that you need a lot more time. Well, you need basically double the time compared to a normal animation at 30 frame or 25 frame per second. If you know from the beginning what's the length of your animation, 250 frames are going to be 10 seconds. Okay, so it's easy to do the conversion. I believe there's a way to set this in seconds too, but I never be bothered because I think it's fast enough thinking about the number of frames. Plus, especially when you're rendering, it's easier to know how many frames did I render than how much time, because then you have to convert the time in rendering it in frames. So I prefer working with frames, but again, it's up to you. Output, it's where your final output will be, and we can decide if it's going to be an image or it's going to be a video. So here you have different kind of format. And let's stop it here and we go to the next one, which is what is it gonna be rendered. So I can render my image with different layer, or if you prefer, I can render different layer that then combined will give my final image. Now you know that it's possible, but we're not gonna do it. And then we have some properties regarding the scene, which is basically what I'm gonna render. For example, what camera, what is the background. It's not really important because this automatically will be set. What may be interesting is changing the units. We are in Europe and we use the metric system, and I don't know where are you in the world, if there is anybody else using another system. Blender comes by default in metric, and I think they did very good. It's easy to understand the metric system, and you can change it if you want, but don't do it. So the length, it's meters. So while when you're doing 2D, it doesn't really matter. 1 unit, you can decide if 1 unit is 1 kilometer or 1 centimeter, doesn't matter. So unit scale is 1, and here is meters. When you do 3D, the way things behave, it's based on physics. So for example, if you have a light, or if you have some physics animation, and you know that an object has a weight of some kind, and the unit is 1, and here is meters, but your object is just a ball, and the ball is probably 20 centimeters, but you use the scale as 20, it's 20 meters, the kind of bounce will be completely off. So it's important you know you're working in meter. That means that 1 centimeter is gonna be just 100 of this size. Okay, so the unit scale right now it's 1. You can set it different. My suggestion is keeping the scale 1 and changing instead this one if you really want to change it. If not, keep the standard one, and remember that if you're doing 10 meters, you put 10 as a number. If you're doing 10 centimeter, you have to put 0.01. Sorry, 0.1. That's 10 centimeter. If you're doing 1 centimeter, it's going to be 0.01. Anyway, doesn't matter for 2D too much. It may actually matter if you want to use physics in 2D. That's a bit advanced for this course, so we'll keep it like this. You know where the settings are. You're going to modify that in the future. You can enable gravity. That means that if an object is has a weight and we enable gravity, the object with the animation will fall. Okay, then we can integrate some other, they are called rigid body, that are objects that basically modify the behavior of other objects that go against them. Okay, so a rigid body, imagine a rigid body, it's a table, while your object with gravity is a ball. So the ball will just bounce or stop on the table if gravity is enabled. If gravity is disabled, nothing will happen in your animation. So it's a dynamic kind of animation. We don't animate the object. The objects follow physics rule, which is very cool and very accurate, but may become very heavy on the system, especially if you have multiple objects. Next one, it's the world properties, which means what I see here, or what I see as a background of my object. Okay, right now we have a color, we can change the color. If I change this color in this specific view, nothing will change, because this, don't forget, is not the final render. This is just a preview. It's a very rough preview, and it's called, in this case, viewport. It's called solid, just called solid. Then we have other ways to preview the file. We have material preview, and we have this one, which is rendered. Now if I click now, just by curiosity, on this one, you will notice that not much has changed because we don't have any material, we didn't set different background. But just to show how this works, if I click one click on the color, change the color, and will change. Now you may ask, but you changed the color, why has changed also the cube or the square in it? If I go here, the solid is still the same. If I go into the material preview, the solid is still the same. If I go in render, everything changes because this is basically based on physics. A cube or an object that has no strong characteristic, as a plain gray, and actually has no material set attached to it, will reflect the color of the environment. Okay, imagine that as kind of a mirror. It's not properly a mirror, but it's behaving like a mirror, will absorb the surrounding. In this case, the only surrounding is the background, which is not just the bottom of the object. There's no bottom in the object. The background, it's something that it's all around. Imagine a sphere, okay, around this world, around your drawing. This is this background. It's not a real object, it's not a plane, it's not a paper. You can add the paper and everything will change again. I will show you how to do it. But this color is like a big sphere around whatever you are designing. So if I move in 3D, you will notice that the background, it's everywhere. Okay, so the object, it's red everywhere. And it's, of course, not something that you would do. You don't use it like this normally. So let's go back to our default color. Oops. Okay, well, that's something else I want to show you, as these are all the preview that you can use. As I said, this is the solid, so just show the shapes. We have the material, we have no material, this like a white gray kind of material, and then you have the preview of the render. Just preview is not final quality, but it's as close as possible to final quality. You have also this one that will show you the outline, which is called wireframe. So wireframe, it's a term that you need to learn, absorb. That's gonna be one of the most used term. When you edit geometry in 2D, you usually don't use a wireframe, mainly because you don't need a wireframe. What you can do editing, I'll show quickly the point of this object. It's easy. You just select a point, you move it around. There's nothing wrong that will need a wireframe. It's nothing, not wrong, but there's nothing complicated about moving these vertices. While if I'm in 3D, how can I select the point that is on the back? I will have to move around, and most of the time you will do it. But sometimes it's worth understanding what's inside this object. Maybe there is another object going inside. For like half of this object there is, quickly I'll create another object. How can I see what's inside, what's going on inside these two objects? So while in 2D they are just like overlapping and doesn't really matter what's happening. But what's going on there? So I need to activate wireframe to see what's going on. Again, this is only used when you have complicated situations and when you need 3D. So when the objects have a 3D dimension. Otherwise, you will stick most of the time to solid or the other preview styles. Going back to the user interface, so color, strength of the color, it's, imagine the background, so this sphere all around being a sphere without any gradient, so it doesn't receive light, doesn't receive shadow. It's just a plain background all around, but it acts like a light, and that's why your cube actually becomes that color. So if I put it to 0, everything is black, even if the background is purple, or I don't know what color is this, magenta, dark magenta, nothing changed. If I increase the strength, it just like turns on. And if I go even stronger, it will go way beyond this color. It's like increasing the value way beyond that number. You will only need it in some extreme cases. Normally what you're going to use is probably a plain background or other kind of background that I'm going to show you in another moment. Reality is this, the reality is that while this background it's a plain background without anything, if you click on background, there are a number of different backgrounds that you can add that I'm not going to show you now because it's too much, and we don't need it right now. Go back to this visualization, which is called solid. And as you can see, right now basically I'm done. There's not much else because nothing is selected. If I select the object, I will enable all the settings of this object. Before going into each single setting, I will just open this, which I want to remind you it's the same stuff that you can find here, okay, but just remove it from here. This is useful especially if you don't have the interface there and you're working in a full 3D window. You have some of the settings here, and while you can change all of this without going into the interface, so you can use the shortcut, it's important to have a look at some of the settings. For example, you may have moved this like this, and then look at the location. It's a bit of a mess. So what you can do is here just type the location by hand and you are sure that it works. There are different ways to change these values, and they work everywhere, even here. So one is typing, that's the most precise. Then you have this that will change how much are you moving the object, or you can click in the center and slide and drag. Okay, so that's the transform of an object. You also have stuff like relations. That means one object is following another object. Let's say, for example, quickly, if I have these two objects and I don't want them to be one object, I want them to stay two different objects, but I want that one of them will move depending on the movements of the other one. So I'll select the first one, the second one, and I basically create a parenting relationship. So if I select the first one, let's do it through the interface, and then I have here the color picker, or the object picker in this case. Select the second object. Now you see there is also a line between them. That means that everything I do in this one will basically reflect in the other one. It also means if I rotate this object, I'm going to show you in a moment how to rotate, the other object will follow. Okay, and this is very useful when you're doing animation, for example, because, well, you need these kind of things, right? While I can keep rotating this, and it's not affecting this one. So this one is the parent, and these are the back, and these are called relations. Collections, well, it show in which collection is the object. Again, it's the same thing going here. Or you can create a collection very easily. Right click, move to collection. It's already in a collection, but I can decide to move it. Right now it's in the scene collection. I can create another collection and call it objects, I don't know, right now it's okay. And then I have my collection called objects here that can go inside another collection and going on like this forever. All of these relations can be seen in collection, and again you can remove it from there, or you can remove the collection Another thing is that if you remove the collection, the object stays. So you are not removing the object inside the collection, you're just removing the logic organization of the object. Visibility, well, this may be important, but I'll show you a better way to handle this. You can have an object in the viewport. You can decide to hide the object in the viewport, which is exactly the same as doing this. You can decide the object that it's hidden in the viewport, but it's shown in the final render. Or you can decide the opposite. Maybe you have an object that you're using as a guide, or you're using to animate, to have, I don't know, some kind of, for example, a parent object that is used to rotate another object, but you don't want that to show in the render because it's just a tool. So it's still working here, but it's not shown in the final render. This is easy to understand. I cannot select the object anymore. So how can I, let's say that I have another object, okay? This happen often. I can select this. I cannot select this, so how can I select this again? Well, you go in cube here in the outline, and then you can do it. Or another way to have this handy, it's clicking here and decide what icon should I show. And in this case, it's going to be selectable, and it's going to be viewport and renders. Okay. Now I have the same things, but here. So doesn't matter if I have this object selected or not. I know that this one cannot be selected, so I can go click in there, and now I can select everything. Or I can just deselect all of them, and now I cannot select anything anymore. So having this icon here just makes things so much easier. And this, again, it's a new feature of the software, so it's very much appreciated. Now, objects can be modified in different ways. You usually don't want to use a normal cube as is. You may need it, but normally you modify that. So there's a modifier menu. Here you can add a number of what are called non-destructive modifiers. That means that, let's try to add one, for example. Let's go in 2D, so we'll see what it does in 2D before going in 3D. Bevel will create this kind of profile. Has a number of options, but the good thing is that it stays there, so whatever I do, I can always go back and keep modifying or removing the object and go back to my previous geometry. Or let's say that I have a bevel and then I want to add another one. Let's say that I'll add the form. I'm gonna explain to you what does it do later. I have now this workflow is going from my geometry, initial geometry or shape, to bevel, and then it adds a simple deform. I can decide to remove the bevel, okay, or I can hide just the bevel so it's not visible there. I can remove it altogether, but I also can change the order, and you see that it's slightly changing. The reason is because it's a simple shape. You cannot appreciate how different may be changing the order of this object. let's go with some modifier quickly. I'm not gonna show you any modifier now, but just to explain to you the concept of the order of the modifier. Subdivision surface is basically, as let's call it, a smoothing of the geometry. And let's say that I want to, again, simple the form and just, yeah, let's increase it. Okay, so you can see that I'm deforming this geometry quite a lot. If I change the order, I achieve a completely different result. So it's important to think about what kind of result you want to achieve and the order of the modifiers. Now, each single part can be animated, but right now we're not going to go into the modifier. This is just a way to modify your object in a non-destructive way, because there's also a destructive way, which it doesn't mean that you really are breaking the object, but it means that you cannot go back. Okay, you cannot go back to the original mesh, the original shape you started with. Next one, it's particle system. We don't care about that. Physics, we're not gonna do any physics. Constraints, doesn't matter. Object data. What you need is gonna be probably this one, material properties. The material properties will open a can of worm, I would say. So I will do into material later. I'm gonna just show you that the material is empty right now. You can have libraries of material, and there are a lot of standard material that are ready to be used. Most of the materials are very good for 3D. There are not many libraries for 2Ds, but the material for 2Ds, especially for motion graphics, may be custom made, and they can be plain color sometimes, or they can be some shiny color like gradient, easy to make. So there's no really need to create a material, as complex material like metal. In 2D, a metal is probably just a gradient. So we will see it, we will get there at some point. What I'm gonna show you just quickly, that you can add a material and you have a number of options in this material, and it's very, very, very deep system. Forget the material for now, because it's really, really a complex things to go through. Going back on the other side, and that's finally what you can do with this object in this window. These are the selections icon. If you click, you can see all the kind of different selection. Here's the cursor. We disable the cursor for now, so we're not gonna use the 3D cursor. I'll show you already that if you click on move, you are presented with this gizmo that is based in the center of the object, in the origin of the object, which is the yellow dot. Some other objects may have the yellow dot in other places. We have rotation. Again, if you the first time you use this, you may want to use the icons, because you have to understand what's happening. Then you can use the shortcut on the keyboard, but let's start with the icons. So it's pretty clear. You select the axis you want to use and rotate. If you keep Control pressed, you have a snap. So in this case, if you look at the left here, look at here, once I start rotating, you can clearly see the degree of rotation. Okay, so it's easy with the snap to rotate exactly as you need. And again, any axis you need. If you click in the center, it's free, and the rotation is based on whatever you're looking at. Unless you want to just randomize the rotation of an object, I don't know why you would do it. Then you have scale. Again, it's easy. There are scales based on 2 dimensions, 1 dimension, or if you click in the center, if you click in any place inside the circle, you are scaling the whole thing. Again, you can go with Control and do snapping. Same thing with the moving, you can use snapping. Okay, so the snapping is very important to be precise. You can have also enable this transform, which has a mix of everything, which enables you to move, rotate, or scale, but only in one or all dimensions. So look at the, for example, the scale. The scale is this cube here. While if I click on scale, I also have this that represent the plane I'm going to scale. So it's 2-dimension scale right now, while this one is 1 dimension. I hope this is clear. I mean, it should be clear enough. I think it's intuitive. Then you have something else for measuring what you're doing, and annotation. I barely use them. What I want to show you, it's actually something else. I'll show you the positioning, fine. I showed you rotation, and you can see here it's changing. But what I want to show is when you go into an orthographic view, and right now I press rotate, I need to make sure that I select the right axis, because if I go to rotate here and I select the center, this will happen. That's not something you need for 2D. That's why the rotation, which is the easiest, it's the easiest thing to do in 2D, it's probably better to do it, to activate it with the shortcut on the keyboard. So let's say that you're here, you press R, which is rotate, then these new things appear and you just rotate. It's kind of easy. It still supports the snapping, and it's the best way to rotate in 2D. So doesn't matter if you are in 3D, you can still use that, but then you are going in an axis that it's the view axis. So it's the axis that starts from your point of view towards that yellow point. So if you are in 3D, you need to select the axis that you want. But I'm not going to show you that. For now, you can stick to this, because it will work only if you add a lot of different shortcuts together. So if you combine shortcuts, so I'm not going to do that. In the same way though, if you are in 2D and let's remove this, let's go with the selection, and you want to move, you press T to remove this if you don't need them. So you press G and you are presented with this icon, and it means that you can move your object around. Escape to go back. So to confirm, you have to click again, okay, or hit enter in the keyboard. While you're moving around, what I'm doing is actually, I wish you could see, I'm clicking once, pressing the shortcut. It could be G for moving or R for rotate, and then I'm not clicking. Okay, it just basically it's stuck to what I do with my mouse, and then to confirm I have to click or hit enter in the keyboard. Of course, you can also scale. Scale is here is going to be easy. It's S, and it's scaled based on the origin again. So if you want to move the origin to another place, you have to do it in a different way. I'm going to show you that in a different moment. Now, the problem with scale is that probably scale, it's easier to work scale is going to be easier to work with the icon, because you may want to scale that completely, or you may want to scale only one direction, so it's faster with the icon in 2D. while this one is gonna be tricky because you may be wrong, and sometimes you may not notice. You just activate this, you just rotate it slightly, and then yeah, it's still okay, but there's actually here a border now that you don't want in 3D, in 2D. So the best way to reset the thing is going to here the transform, or here the transform, open transform, and fix your rotation. So in this case we only want to rotate the Z because we are looking from the Z axis, and we reset the other two, and now it's perfectly aligned. Okay, so we've seen a number of different ways to modify the position of object. I'll show you how to get back to a normal configuration. Don't forget, as always, if you are panicking, load factory settings and you are back to this. You can remove what you don't need. Right now you don't need it. You have already the cursor. Don't worry, you just need to practice a lot. Another thing I want to show you before finishing this lesson is the fact that as the origin of the object is in the center, you are basically presented with an object that is in the center position, and that means that the grid is the visualization of the grid is like cutting through the object. Don't worry about that, especially if you are in 2D. Doesn't matter where the grid is in the depth, because you're not gonna see the depth. So before going how to create other objects so you can practice a little bit, add mesh. Forget for a moment anything that it's too complicated, even if it's self-explanatory. Forget that. Let's start with something simple. Plane. See, oh, but it's a cube anymore. No, it's just a plane. Okay, so this is probably what you're gonna use the most to create 2D images. This can be transformed in a cube, of course. I used to say that everything can be done in 3D, and that's just the truth. You can go back to any shape you want, and you can go forward in any direction you want. So there's no limitation. The good things of working in 3D is just a real sandbox where you can add, once you add the third dimension to your design, you can really have a much stronger creative impact in whatever you do, because you can decide to do effects in so many different ways, and you create your own style, or you create your own styles, and start working from there. It just opens a lot of possibilities. For example, a shadow. Yesterday we were talking, in the previous lesson we were talking about adding shadows to a 2D object. Yes, you can just click one place and add a shadow, but what if the shadow is created using physics rules, where I create a lamp to have a shadow? Or what if I draw a shadow and I set the shadow at a different distance that should be in reality, so altering the physics? Well, all of this can be done, but I'm not gonna do this now. Just showing you that sometimes things maybe look the same, but they are not really the same. I'm not talking about philosophy, I'm just talking about point of views. When you have an orthographic view, for example, let's remove this and let's create a cone. Is this a circle? Yeah, from the top it's a circle, right? And what about a cylinder? It's still a circle. So you don't need the 3D part when you do 2Ds, but having the third dimension, or add the third dimension when you want, will just open to many more possibilities. And there are the software like After Effects that in the beginning they were 2D softwares, And also Photoshop has added the 3D dimension, while Blender is coming from another place. It's actually a 3D software that it's adding tools for optimize the 2D. Or I would call it, it's a hybrid between 2D and 3D, really, the things you can do. At the end, you can render it as a cartoon, completely flat, or you can render a cartoon with some kind of shading that looks 3D, or you can simply do 3D, so moving the objects in all the dimensions. So if you want to play a little bit without going into editing the geometry, you can just check what geometries are available, basic geometries. I will explain eventually what's the difference between, for example, this sphere and this sphere. They are both are spheres, and if I smooth them, they kind of look similar. You will say, oh, but this one has more segments, but I can add more segments to it. Okay, just quickly showing you that in 3D you may have, well, these two are the same shape, right? And it doesn't matter, it's a sphere, so it doesn't matter how I look at it, it's just exactly the same shape. But if I look at the structure, it's very much different. So let's go back to this. Look at the structure. They are completely different. That means that when you are designing, you can have different control points of your geometry to achieve completely different results. So next lesson, that is going to be probably Monday at around the same time, 3 p.m. I'm going to start showing you different kind of, not just geometry, but shapes, 2D shapes, and how to get into this editing kind of level. So how to move all the parts. Quickly, I can tell you that in a sphere environment, let's remove this. In a 3D environment, sorry, and let's go back to the usual cube. We have edges, we have faces, and we have points, okay? Vertices. Now, this may be called in other ways too. Usually you would call face polygon. It's not completely right, but it's geometrically, it's what is it? It's a polygon. The edge can be called segment. It's always the same thing. The dots are vertices, can be called points. It's still the same thing. So it's important to understand that edges, side, segment is the same thing. Polygons are faces, and we'll stop here. Okay, next time I'm gonna show you what this thing do and how to create probably the first small design in Blender. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed and you can start playing around with the interface, exploring maybe things. I hope you can get stuck somewhere. That means that you are exploring a lot. And of course, if you have questions, then you can ask me next live session. And I wish you a great weekend. It's sunny here in the UK, and we're gonna experience the sunny UK from indoor probably. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye bye.